November 26, 2024. Well, after a brief pause, it looks like Ukraine has gone back to shooting missiles into Russia again, with some more ATACMS strikes that have occurred recently. And I guess the French have finally thrown their hat in the ring, and they're going to provide 12 of their Scout missiles by December. Um, and of course, they have permission to use, obviously, which is their version of the Storm Shadow. So, meanwhile, NATO seems to have gone into kind of a weird frenzy of kind of unreality, if you ask me, talking about war, and apparently the Germans are talking about people being ready to go into bomb shelters and all sort of crazy stuff like this. Of course, you never know. I guess it looks like maybe the threats are starting to sink in a little bit, but the reactions are still somewhat irrational, I think, on the West. So, at any rate, and I've been following various commentators like the people on the Napolitano and Daniel Davis deep dive and things like that. I'm not sure I quite agree with their perspective. I'm not totally against where they're coming from, but to some degree, I think they're maybe being a little bit too nervous. Of course, seeing as how I'm living probably about 5 miles from a potential high probability nuclear target, I might maybe I should be nervous too. At any rate, but here's the situation as I see it. Okay, as I mentioned in my last video, I went through what we knew about this Oreshnik missile that was used to strike this factory in Ukraine and Gettr, which apparently makes missiles. I'm not sure we're talking about their indigenous anti-tank missiles or things of that sort. Are we talking about this Neptune thing that they have and so forth, or this other long-range missile they're talking about developing? If that was it, then it looks like the Russians struck pretty heavily and destroyed a very high-priority target. Since the attacks began, I guess right in the last few hours, as I understand from the time of this recording, the Russians launched a massive drone attack on Kyiv, and as always, Ukrainians are claiming they shot most of them down or something like. I don't know if they really did or not. I'm not so sure. Are we talking about they're just shooting them down with machine guns, or are we talking about actually using anti-aircraft missiles to do this? At any rate, that's probably one of the many responses the Russians will have. I think they'll be varied in the type of weapons they use and so forth. I think they may have a fairly limited number of these Oreshnik missiles. They've claimed they have some. I mean, a quantity. We're not sure how big of a quantity. It seems to be a developmental missile, which may be about to enter serial production. So, and as I mentioned before, this will be expensive. So the question is, how much risk are we at? Are we really on the edge of World War III? Is the outgoing Biden administration trying to start a major U.S. NATO Russian conflict so that Trump will inherit it and won't be able to carry forward his avowed peace plan that's been discussed all throughout the campaign? And that's kind of what we're going to get into here. If you like this video, please give me a like. Thanks to the latest subscribers, and you can subscribe, of course, and click the bell for notifications. Also, from this information below, you can also follow me on Rumble if you're on that instead. Yeah, of YouTube. I don't know. The idea has been thrown out that somehow that Putin has actually put a chip on his shoulder and dared us to knock it off, and we just knocked it off, and so now it's full-scale conflict. I'm not so sure that's the case, and I don't think he's exactly bluffing here either. What he has done is demonstrated a new weapon, which is an intermediate level weapon, both in intermediate range to the ICBM, but also is intermediate between a nuclear weapon on the one hand, or the traditional conventional missiles like Iskanders and the cruise missiles he's been using on the other. This one is, firstly, much longer ranged. It strikes faster, being everybody's keeping the term hypersonic. Almost all intermediate range ballistic missiles are hypersonic. I don't think it's a hypersonic maneuvering missile. I think it is just a ballistic missile, and it does. And as I pointed out, the kinetic energy of the impact is one of the key destructive factors. So my thinking is that he will presumably continue to respond by hitting Ukraine harder and harder in retaliation for these strikes in the Kursk region or wherever else they decide to go with the limited number of ATACMS and Iskanders that they have. I mean, it's not Iskanders, Storm Shadows that they have. And so I think that's kind of the direction I see. I would think that the highest priority target the Russians would want to go for would be the air bases that have the planes that can carry the various Western air-launched missiles, such as the Su-24s and perhaps F-16s, which, there's even some talk in the future that JASSM might enter the fray. It hasn't yet. And of course, the F-16 would be a natural carrier for that. If they can destroy these on the ground with this new missile they have, because that, unlike otherwise, they were kind of reduced to using cruise missiles, which are slow and easier to intercept, and then for these deep strikes toward the Polish border and the Romanian border. But with this new missile that they have, this Oreshnik, they could carry out those strikes anywhere in Ukraine or well beyond very rapidly and with great power to knock out these. And it seemed to be ideal for going after like air bases, for instance, with something like, I can count, they've been saying 6 groups of 6 penetrators. That'd be a total of 36 projectiles that would come down in a pattern. Well, that's not confirmed yet, but that's what I've heard. Other people throw out different numbers, but that could do a tremendous amount of damage to the shelters that you'd want to store your aircraft in, and then launching, say, conventional cruise missiles with explosives at the same time would hit any that were dispersed around the base. So in other words, it's very possible this would be a very effective technique for that. There's also this major NATO bunker, apparently it's near the Polish border, slightly inside of Ukraine, that's used for a lot of coordination and command and control, where probably a lot of the telemetry that's used to target these ATACMS missiles is processed, from the U.S. to the Ukrainians, and the Russians have directly threatened that they might attack that target. And since it's also inside of Ukraine, I think that they very well might. And somebody was saying that they might give a warning so people could evacuate. I don't know. Do they want those people to evacuate? Or maybe those are the ones they want to get. If they decide to use it against Kyiv proper, that's a different issue. Maybe they would identify the area and let the civilians evacuate. A hardcore military intelligence target, I'm not sure they would want the people to get out in one piece, so to speak. But we'll see. I didn't know that Putin was known to be that humane. So anyway, that's kind of my view. Now the main thing is, I think that the West still has a tremendous amount of deterrence here, and the reason is that directly attacking, it is a question, if they directly attack targets inside of Poland, for instance, or Romania, such as the air base in Romania where the pilots are being trained for the Ukrainian Air Force, or those 2 defense systems that are so brought up by the Russians to complain about a lot, which are standard missiles based on the Aegis system, a land-based Aegis version, if you will. I don't know. I still tend to doubt, even if they did that, we would just simply declare war on Russia and start mobilizing, our entire army, our National Guard, all of our air power, and hundreds of thousands of NATO troops would start swarming, eastward to actually invade Russia. Or something, or to actually go into Ukraine and directly repel the Russian army. I just doubt that that's what would happen. But there very well could be a reprisal strikes against Russians using conventional weapons, for example. And that would seem to be the most likely response. The other thing we have to consider is some forms of horizontal escalation. The one thing you have to remember here, of course, is that NATO navies, U.S. and NATO countries, have great naval supremacy over the Russians. And so a possibility of a naval blockade that could be imposed in retaliation was something that Russians would clearly be concerned about. And that would totally inhibit their trade in oil and other materials. So I think that's a big deterrent. The other aspect is NATO air power is very dominant. I mean, we have our fifth generation aircraft, and well, Elon Musk may want to trash the F-35 as apparently he did in a recent series of tweets. The fact is that this is a stealth aircraft and has great penetrating power against air defenses. Notice that Israel has used them successfully recently in their attacks on Iran without a whole lot of problems. So I don't think that's the kind of airplane that would be used to launch their standoff air-launched ballistic missiles. So probably not, maybe, but so I think they probably went in and hit some targets. So this is so I think in that sense, I think Russia's escalatory options are probably limited. However, and I think this is where people sometimes misinterpret what Putin is saying. On one hand, they think he's just bluffing. On the other hand, they think he's just, really is threatening to do something rash immediately. But I think this is all the reduction of the nuclear doctrine and this new missile are both designed to be deterrents against NATO entrance into the war. It would only be if NATO takes the initiative and attacks and breaks into the current red lines of they've stayed out and worked through proxies, basically, right? If they actually enter the war overtly, that's when I think that strikes against NATO countries could occur. For instance, if air power were to be deployed against Russian positions, then I think they might very well face these kind of missiles on their air bases and on their other targets. And so, and of course, again, the question still is how many each of them has. It also, I think, has already served a political morale thing on the Russian side a little bit, and that is something new. It's bold, it's different, and it has its effect. So that's kind of the way I see that aspect of it. Now, the other aspect is there does seem to be, based on the sources I've been able to follow on YouTube, amazing what you can find on there, a lot of alert type activity going on in the Russian strategic forces. Their version of the E-4B Night Watch that they have a plane similar that I guess Putin and his command staff would fly in, and it's apparently been flying around between Moscow and the Urals, and other people have apparently been moving around. Perhaps a command staff, a secondary command staff, has been set up in an underground bunker to fill in if been reinforced, if you will, to fill in the event there was an attack by us, which I don't think is coming, but maybe with the Russian paranoia, they may think it is. It's always possible that they might think that. And then of course, our people I mentioned earlier are really upset with his comments with this Admiral Buchanan and what he said. And essentially, he was talking about the aspect of, which is something I'm personally concerned about too, in a way, as the strategic situation we'd be placed in if we did get into an exchange with Russia. What about China? And he's trying to assert that we would have enough reserve capability to also engage China. I guess the question, though, would that be enduring in the event that we actually had a full-scale exchange with Russia? And that is something I doubt. I think that that a large-scale collapse might really lead to a pretty rapid decline in our capabilities, and probably, of course, the Russians as well. Although you never know. I mean, who's better at one thing? Their longer-range capabilities are probably based more on. They have land-based mobile missiles, and in fact, another interesting question, which I don't know the answer to, is the arms control treaties and generally limit launchers, not actual missiles in inventory. And we actually have a few extra Minutemen, other than what's actually in the silos. Although the number's not that great, and they use those for these test launches that we have. When we scale back a certain number. We originally have 550 Minuteman IIIs, and now we're down to 400 deployed. So, there's a limited number, and we're using them for tests, and eventually we're going to run out, which is why the new Sentinel system is being developed. But I think it is a consideration. Or the other issue is our policy in the event of a full-scale exchange with Russia to also hit China too. because, of course, if China's left untouched, and of course, if the um, predictions of certain climate people, scientists, turn out to be wrong, that the world won't necessarily go into a 10-year nuclear winter freeze that kills virtually everybody. If it's much less than that, and given the fact that the actual megatonnage of contemporary arsenals is so much lower than it had been in the height of the Cold War, that, China theoretically, although facing probably an economic depression over it and a lot of other things, might very well come out of it somewhat unscathed unless they were attacked too. If they could stay out of the conflict, they could emerge effectively as the strategic winner. And so that's the whole issue he raised, I think, addresses that issue more than at least that we have strategies or plans around that issue. But the idea that they've taken it as he's somewhat sanguine about the consequences of a nuclear war, I don't think that's the case at all. Nor do I really think the current administration is all eager to engage in anything like that. I think they may so firmly believe it won't happen that they're less concerned than they should be about the possibility of escalation. But I don't think that means they're really eager to do it, because things like them and Trump would become somewhat irrelevant if that actually occurred, right? So at any rate, that's kind of what I think about the situation, and we'll wait and see how Russia continues to respond and how Ukraine continues to respond. For the moment, it looks like they're kind of in a tit-for-tat escalatory spiral, but it also seems that actually Ukraine has a limited supply of missiles to engage in this with, and probably is not nearly enough to really stop the Russian advances that are occurring in almost all the fronts at this point in time. So anyway, that's it for now. I'll of course be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and you can follow my commentary, particularly on X, and the address of my social media accounts are in the description below.